Hey class, Dr. Thorpe again here, coming to you with our weekly update. I do have a really excited bird chirping out here in my yard, so I'm sorry if that is a bit distracting. But I wanted to check in on some of our weekly items. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was your outline for your unit plan. I really want to emphasize that you have some freedom in the way that I teach the class to do this in the way that is going to be relevant to you. So I know that those of you who have been classroom teachers for a while, you understand that the kinds of planning that you learned how to do in your undergrad program and that you might be asked to do in this assignment just aren't realistic, in terms of the time that you actually have to work in the classroom. So I want to just reassert that you have the freedom to use any outline or framework that is valid, according to like best practices, and that also incorporates all of the assignment requirements. And this week I'll be making a kind of like a checklist for those priority requirements so that we can make sure that we have them. A couple of the biggest things that I noticed was, and it's part of the using the universal design for learning, is a disconnect almost. It asks you to identify and list everything in such different ways that it can be hard to connect the things that really matter. So when we talk about our big learning questions in terms of best practice, those things are: what do we want students to learn in terms of priority standards and supporting standards? And we talked last week about the differences between the two and how to determine what is priority versus what is supporting, right? Those priority standards have longevity. They are essential for living, and they go across content areas, and they serve as building blocks for future material. So there's going to be a priority standard. So it's: what do we want students to learn? How do we know that they learned it? What do we do when they don't learn it? And what can we do to enrich the experience for students who learn it the first time? So those are our big questions that we're going to want to ask. And when we look at what do we want students to learn, how do we know that they've learned it? We have to make sure that our assessments align with the skills and the standards that we've outlined in part one, first of all. But we've also got to make sure that we have a clear line between our learning target and our success criteria. So your learning target is what do you want kids to know? And your success criteria is how do you know that they've learned it, right? One thing that I do in my class is when I write up what we're doing on the board, I do learning target success criteria. I do what are we doing, why are we doing it, what does it look like? Those are the three things that I write on the board for students at the start of class so that they know that mastering it looks like them being able to do this thing. And then at the end of class, we'll reflect. We'll do either an exit ticket or use an app that I've developed called Learn With Me. And that's where they say, I feel like I am at this indicator toward what this mastery looks like, right? I feel like I'm progressing there. I feel like I'm there. I feel like I'm there so much I could help another classmate. But having that success criteria there is a really important part of learning. So I would just really encourage you to even use that language, right? Learning target success criteria in there as well. Also, a lot of us had outlined some notes for enrichment opportunities, but also reminding you that that third question there, what do we do when students don't learn it? That remediation, intervention, and support piece, right? A lot of times we think about supports for like ESL students or students for IEPs or 504s. Yes, we want that as well. But we need to have built in, what are we going to do when we discover through the assessment that students did not master this specific skill, and making sure that what we're doing is aligned with skills and standards. So if you are reading Great Expectations, for example, the learning outcome isn't that you've experienced Great Expectations, right? And the end of novel test isn't just like plot points from Great Expectations. It's you read Great Expectations for students to master this skill, and then they will show you that they've mastered that skill using the novel Great Expectations. Just kind of reframing our mindset around that, I think, will be important as well. Then as we move on to the Teach Like a Champion work, a lot of you addressed no opt-out, which is great, and holding students accountable for the learning. I just want to, just enter in an idea, kind of like last week, that just make sure that you have established the classroom culture necessary so that does not turn into a fear-based experience for a student, a demeaning experience for a student. As we hold students accountable for learning, we want to simultaneously empower them, give them confidence, and then set them up for the next learning opportunity. So we've just got to make sure that we kind of walk that fine line. Also, I think one thing to keep in mind is that no opt-out and a couple other engagement strategies are kind of based on this long-standing and really traditional social norm that the best kind of engagement with learning is active and obvious and highly verbal. And those are really kind of not progressive or best practice ideas around education, and they don't really speak to mind, brain, and teaching or trauma-informed instruction. The Limov text does predate those major movements in education, right? It predates trauma-informed instruction. It predates a lot of what we now know about the mind, brain, and teaching. So just looking at Limov's work, which is substantial and significant, through those lenses is super important. I think that there is a tremendous push now to value introverted individuals. And as teachers, that can be hard for us because a lot of us are extroverted. We're called to the profession because we're extroverted. I feel like I understand this pretty well because I'm a really introverted person. So I do, like, my teaching, if you were to watch my classroom, a lot of times people will come in and they'll say, "Where's Thorpe?" And it's because I'm sitting with kids. I'm sitting with groups of students. I'm not at the front of the room. That's just not my teaching style. Sorry for the brief interruption there. I had gotten a call while I was recording. But I think just recognizing that a quiet mouth does not equal a quiet mind, and I don't know often equals I know plenty, but I don't want to say it right now. I think that realizing that those ideas are valid is a really good entry point to kind of interact with Limov's work as we transition into our professional practice. There are a couple of books that I would recommend reading on this. The first one is Quiet: The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. If you've not read that book, please do. It is just foundational in helping us understand all of our students better, and it really helped me reframe some of my thinking as to what I thought was disengagement as just really normative introverted behavior. And it challenged me as a teacher to find ways for my introverted students to express their learning and really show me what they knew in ways that were as valid to me as some other ones that were more better suited for extroverted students. So I would for sure recommend that one. And then the second one that I would recommend is How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. This book, I think at this point in time, as we work toward diversity, inclusion, justice, and equity, is essential reading for teachers who are preparing themselves to be champions for all students in a system that is not intended for it to be that way. But one thing that Kendi talks about is one of the things when he came to this anti-racist work, he had to get over racist ideas that he had about himself. And because it's so ingrained in our society that blackness and things that are, black are bad and things that are white are good. So for example, sometimes a student of color will say, "I don't know," not because they don't know, they know plenty, but because there is this self-hatred and this idea that responding in that way is acting white, which then diminishes their social capital, and which in school can be some of the most valuable capital to them that they feel like they have. So understanding it from that point of view and how students come to view themselves that way and how that behavior manifests itself in your classroom, right? And just kind of wrapping our minds around the fact that we could be punishing students for culturally normative behavior that comes out of hundreds of years of systemic and institutional racism, that's heavy. So I think that the more we read, the more we know, the more we understand. I think that those things will just be helpful overall. So that was my kind of guidance and reflections on last week's work. And then as we move forward into this week, you'll notice it does say to start that reframing work. The reframing work was new to me. I'm the only person that teaches this class, and this was the first time that the reframing work has been a part of the class. So I did check and clarify on that and kind of what that was, because instructors don't receive a book for that. That is a part of the other reframing course. We simply provide the repository for that work. So I think that in this unit would be a good time to start on it. in the very last unit in class, you will deposit it in there for the university to collect. And if you have any questions, I have no answers, but I will be a conduit to get the answers for you. So if you have questions on that reframing work, please send me an email and I will make sure that that question gets answered in a timely manner. Most of your feedback should be in from last week. All of the paper feedback is in. All of the lesson plan, frame feed work is in. I'm working today on responding to beyond the bubble test, and I look really forward to our continued work in the weeks to come. Have a good week, everybody. Be blessed.